All right, we're going to start off with a look at progressivism here by defining some terms, looking at some examples, and talking about exactly how it fit in with the trends in the early 20th century. So obviously we're going to start with what progressivism is. When I look at a term like this, I always like to look at what the root word is here, and in this case it's progress. So of course progress means moving forward, improving, getting better, and that was the goal of progressives in the early 20th century. This is a direct response to the problems that emerged during the Gilded Age, and in pretty much all of the examples of progressive reform and the goals of progressives, you're going to see them related to a problem from Gilded Age we talked about during that unit. Now, in some cases, progressives go too far, and we're going to talk about that, but there was a lot of good work done. So we look at who a progressive is. It's people who worked, again, to move society forward, to get better, and it is an attempt to fix the problems associated with industrialization, this new America that emerges after the Civil War. We're going to talk about two different types of progressives. We have idealists and pragmatists. Idealists are people who have the perfect vision of a solution to the problem that they care about in mind and will accept nothing less. A pragmatist is more realistic. Pragmatic means realistic, and they're willing to accept progress, maybe not a perfect end to their work, but in their minds, some progress is better than none. And as we go through the unit, as we look at individuals and goals, I want us to be thinking about, is this idealistic? Is this pragmatic? Doesn't matter. What's important about that? We're going to discuss all those things as we go. What's really important to remember about progressives is that they are never one group with one goal. It's not like all people who consider themselves progressive focused on one particular problem for 6 months, got it fixed, and then moved to the next one. Progressivism is a bunch of people working on a whole bunch of goals at the exact same time. Now that can be good because a bunch of areas that need attention are getting that attention. It can be bad though because maybe certain areas aren't getting the attention that they deserve, and that's required to actually fix the problem. There's a good side, bad side. Among the many goals of progressives, some of the big main areas of focus are improving the living conditions of the urban poor. And during the Gilded Age, we talked about tenements and what it was like to live in a city, particularly for immigrants or people who were making very little money. Limiting the power of big business, who I think we can agree dominated the economy during the Great Depression, before any regulations, before any intervention by the government to make laws. That comes during the progressive era. And calling for an honest and responsive government, trying to tackle the corruption and some of the things that we saw with political machines, especially. So we're going to look at examples and mention examples of all of those as we go along. Now, one of the key groups that's necessary during the progressive era are a group called muckrakers. And muckrakers are journalists who wanted to make people aware of a lot of these problems in an effort to initiate change. Certainly, people aren't going to support change if they don't know that there's a problem. So these journalists took it upon themselves to write newspaper articles, to write in magazines, to write books in order to educate the public about some of these negative aspects of society so that we can get change. The political cartoon you see here is Teddy Roosevelt sifting through some of this muck, some of this filth, and uncovering a meat scandal. So, I mean, the term muckrakers is, very, very illustrative. If you take a rake to a nice lawn, looks nice on the outside, you're going to turn up the dirty stuff. So a lot of society looked okay to a lot of people until these journalists did a little bit of digging. So some examples are a woman named Ida Tarbell wrote a book on Rockefeller Standard Oil Company and exposed some of the monopoly efforts that he undertook. And that led in part to anti-monopoly laws. Jacob Riis took pictures, we're going to skip ahead here for a second, took pictures of people in tenement districts and in slums, and didn't just write about what he saw, but he used the pictures to tell the story. Most people, if they didn't live in those areas, would never go to those areas. This was a way for them to be aware of what was going on and maybe support some change. There's also a man named Upton Sinclair who wrote a book called The Jungle that exposed practices in meatpacking facilities, and it was and still is a disgusting book. And when people found out that that was what they were eating, that led to the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906 and the Meat Inspection Act of 1907. So led to some real concrete change in the interest of public safety and public health. All right, some other examples. Again, housing reform was a big area of need. A city like New York passed the Tenement Act of 1901. Landlords were forced to be accountable for the safety, the health, the well-being of their tenants. Not, you get a cold, you're not going to get a landlord in trouble, but dangerous conditions, that's certainly something that can be fixed. Making them install lighting and plumbing and toilets for at least every 2 families seems like the least they could do, but that's progress. That's the government holding people accountable. In the interest of civil rights, the NAACP was formed in 1909, the first civil rights organization in the United States. That's the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. It's still an active civil rights organization today in 2018. And the Anti-Defamation League worked to combat anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish actions, and that's also still an active group today. So unions, as we talked about, we're making some progress in terms of pay and hours and working conditions. Progressives wanted to focus that work to help women and children specifically. And we get child labor laws, we get all kinds of laws during the Progressive era that works to accomplish that. Now, especially with this one, but in a bunch of different areas during the Progressive era, we see a state-by-state approach. Looking at or trying to get a national law passed is very difficult. If you get enough states to join a cause, then national progress will naturally follow. And so that was a strategy that a lot of progressives used. It is slow, but there was progress made. A lot of progressives worked to pass a minimum wage, and Massachusetts became the first state to do that in 1912, but we wouldn't get a national minimum wage until 1938 during the Great Depression. So that's something we'll continue to talk about. At some point, I guess you won't be able to do this on this video, I will include this short video on PowerSchool Learning about the Triangle Shirtwaist Company fire and how sometimes unfortunately, it takes a tragedy in order to inspire change. So if you would please pause this video, go and watch that video. It's like 5 or 6 minutes, and then come back and finish the notes. 3 levels of reform. If we're talking about government reform, city reform, state reform, national reform. Just a couple examples of city reform. A city like Cleveland in Ohio passed new rules for police, holding police accountable and making sure that they're actually protecting and serving and not abusing their power. Also passed a fairer tax system that taxed the people at the top the most and the people at the bottom the least. And Toledo, Ohio passed a minimum wage in kindergartens. Using public money for things like kindergartens doesn't mean it's for little kids, who cares? But somebody at the time might say, but there's a public benefit there, and that's the kind of thing you saw during the Progressive era. In terms of state reforms, probably one of the most famous state reformers is a guy named Robert La Follette from Wisconsin that preached his Wisconsin idea throughout the country. Among other things, a limit on campaign spending, so it's not just the wealthy that dominate political campaigns, and railroad regulations to be fairer to farmers. And as we talked about at the end of the Gilded Age unit, that's going to find a lot of support, especially in the Midwest and west of that. Some other examples: workplace safety laws, limited use kind. I mean, these are attempts to keep people safe and give people opportunities. And we still see efforts in that today. One last thing I'd like you guys to do is to read in your book about these 5 items, these election reforms. If one of the goals of progressives was to make elections fair and the government honest and responsive, then some of these things are necessary to give people a say in the government so that the ruling class doesn't get to stay above everybody else. They are responsive to the people. So look at the definitions of these, write them down in your notes, and then let me know if you have any questions, and we can certainly talk about that. So again, trying to move forward, trying to get better. As we go in the unit, we're going to talk about how maybe some progressives went too far, some didn't go far enough. So it's not all super awesome, but there was a lot of important reform that